All right, welcome everybody to Hardpoints, the podcast about energy, security, and the startup economy and how they intersect to shape the world around us. Each week, we unpack the real dynamics behind the headlines, what's changing, what it means, and why it matters to you. Thanks for being here. Neil, let's get into it.
Doing great. Just got off a spring break. We got to go to Mexico, which is, I just love it down there. And honestly, I just slept a lot. In fact, I didn't realize how sleep deprived I was until I got on vacation and I just slept most of the first 2 or 3 days. It was amazing and rejuvenating and pretty awesome.
Yeah, good. Where in Mexico were you again?
We went to a little town outside of Cancun. So Cancun's fancy and it's a party town. That's not really my scene anymore. Maybe 20 years ago. But we found this little Airbnb north of Cancun. It was kind of on the beach and kind of off the beaten path. Perfect weather and just a gorgeous scene to spend some time with the family.
Yeah, it sounds fairly idyllic. I'm a little jealous, I have to say.
Yeah, it was pretty good. The first sort of proper vacation we've taken in a while. You know, startup CEO life is intense. As I said, I've been as I said, I didn't really realize just how sleep deprived I was until I got the opportunity to sleep more and then just slept a lot. So
yeah, it's I know that feeling. This last week for me has been kind of bananas. We're entering that phase of life with our children where we're increasingly their chauffeur, and so
yeah.
It's, it's time to get ready for the second shift. It's less hanging out with your kids and less like getting them to where they need to be going. So between scouts and football and softball for my daughter, and it's just full tilt boogie. And my wife
and just the coordination, right? Just the coordination to pull it off. It's one thing if you had one kid that had to go one place and only one driver, but the multivariate, it's just there's too many drivers. My mom is involved, which is great. It's helpful, but it's also one more person to coordinate with. What a mess.
Yeah, same here. I'm very fortunate to have 3 of my children's grandparents here in the local area, and they all help out. But yeah, there's 5 different adults that have to coordinate for 2 different kids across 5 different days. Not to mention my wife's work schedule is highly variable, so it's just it's. I don't know how people did it logistically before the advent of digital calendars. Like, what did they do?
Or text messages. Text is how we stay up to date. But I will also say my mom is not the best at text messaging. My dad's a little bit better, but yeah, I don't know. I think the answer is that we have signed our kids up for more stuff and they're just more involved.
I think there's a component of that, though. I remember when I was in junior high that there was a payphone, dating myself here, but there was a payphone there that what kids would sometimes do is they would call their parents collect. And when on the call collect, it's like, Mom, I'm done with practice. And then they would be the name that they'd report.
Oh, that was your name, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I wonder how many of our listeners are going to get that reference. I understand what you mean because I am also of advanced age, but I don't know. Certainly the younger generation would not get that one.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing that happened on vacation is that I just recognized, we all were sprinting 1,000 miles an hour. The other thing I recognize is that I am a little out of shape. Like it just sort of crept up on me. I'm old. I'm not that old. I'm 51, but also, holy moly. How did I must have gained 10 pounds or something without recognizing it. So that's the other thing that happened after I got back was like, I'm going to make a conscious effort to get back in shape.
Yeah. I've been getting up and doing some running in the mornings here recently and same sort of thing. You're like, ooh, hey, not picking up as fast as I used to on this sort of stuff.
Yeah, what happened? What happened, man?
Yeah. Anyways. Well, how about we dive into some of the news here? So moving into our segment, News You Need. And that's because you want to be informed without feeling like you're in a Senate hearing. Let's start at the Pentagon, where things are kind of messy. The moment in a workplace where no one knows who's really in charge and emails are kind of getting forwarded to people who've already quit. Well, that's kind of what's happening in the Department of Defense currently. A second leak of classified information on Signal has dropped. This one from chats involving Pete Hegseth, yes, the Fox News guy who now happens to be the defense secretary, and those that are close to him. The content of those chats hasn't been fully aired out, but according to multiple sources, it's clear there's a lot of chaos, distrust, and some kind of shadow chain of command stuff going on here. Hegseth has fired 3 of his most senior staffers, including Dan Caldwell, Darren Selnick, and Colin Carroll. When combined with some other firings, means he no longer has his 2 closest advisors or chiefs of staff for him, or his deputy. Officials say Hegseth is relying heavily on some outside voices, some from TV, others from within the kind of broader MAGA inner circle. And career staffers are being sidelined or heading for the exits. Meanwhile, he's attempting to get a security clearance for his wife, which he has brought to classified briefings anyways. If this were a season of Veep, it'd be pretty funny, but unfortunately it's real life, and the Pentagon and this dude has the nuclear codes. So there's that. Over at the Department of Veteran Affairs, budget cuts are hitting where it hurts. The VA is facing a staffing reduction of almost 80,000 positions, and it's sending shockwaves through the community that already struggles with a lot of long wait times, mental health support, shortages, and care backlogs. The administration is calling it a necessary adjustment in a tight fiscal climate, but veterans groups aren't totally buying it. Some of them are calling it a betrayal. And of course, somehow Elon Musk, Doge, and all the memes are looped into the public debate, thanks to the usual online chaos. The agency, for its part, is saying that it won't be cutting, quote, mission critical positions, but as claims processors, such as claims processors or medical staff, but will instead be focusing on, quote, bureaucracy and inefficiencies that are getting in the way of customer convenience and service to veterans. It's unclear about what specific roles are under the chopping block, so more to come on that. On the carbon policy front, there's specifically a new carbon border adjustment proposal. Republican Senators Bill Cassidy and Lindsey Graham are floating a bill that would place tariffs on imported goods from countries that don't have strong climate regulations. Basically, if a country doesn't price its carbon emissions, its products could face a fee at the border. That's called a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And while it may not sound new here, other parts of the world have already been rolling them out, such as within the European Union. And also being looked at in Canada and the United Kingdom. And it's a way to kind of protect domestic industries that are already subject to carbon pricing. The idea is to level the playing field. Domestic companies have to account for their emissions, so should the international competitors. And while U.S. lawmakers have proposed similar ideas in the past, including Senator Cassidy himself, this version leans on tariffs instead of on a national carbon price. Supporters say it protects American manufacturing and encourages cleaner global production. Critics worry it could spark trade disputes or be used as a substitute for broader domestic climate action. Finally, in VC land, startup land specifically, VC money is starting to get a little bit more picky. The latest reports are showing about how venture capital is retrenching back to its traditional tech hubs. Going back to mainly New York, San Francisco, and Boston. That means fewer deals in emerging startup scenes like us here in Denver, Austin, or potentially in Atlanta. But the silver lining is that, at least from my perspective, is that climate tech is still doing well. Focusing on energy storage to carbon removal, these startups that are tackling climate are pulling in a good amount of early stage capital, according to some reports from Silicon Valley Bank. That's the news you need. A few stories, a few minutes, and one less reason to scroll some doom headlines before bed. What do you think about all that, Neil?
Oh man. Well, I'll start at the top. I don't have a lot to say about the Hegseth signal thing. It's just ridiculous. I think you do it once, fine. Maybe not even. It's not fine, but you do it once and you get slapped. Hopefully you learn from it. I think that's what we said when we talked about it before. Is like, just learn from it, man. Like, figure it out, get better. He didn't, apparently. I don't know what to say. It's kind of just ridiculous.
Obviously don't want to divulge too much there, but just to say that this is part of the community that we are in. And the majority of the community finds this to be pretty inappropriate in so many ways. Yeah. I think the bigger thing that worries me is just like the U.S. military is one of the best run institutions in the world, and the fact that there's so much chaos in the front office makes me a little concerned about like what are some of the downstream effects going to be of that.
Yeah. I mean, I have personal experience with that. I am actually pursuing some SBIR grants with my company, and it's hard to get full attention from the folks on the others in the government because they spend a lot of their time just sort of worrying if they have a job, managing their workforce, trying to figure out and plan for the future. And I think best summed up. One of the people I work with said to me, "Look, downsizing is fine. Like we all expect ups and downs. It's just the way this is being done that is so difficult. It's sort of being done in an inhumane way with a lot of chaos, and therefore we can't plan or adapt in a smart way." So I think, maybe with Elon transitioning his focus back to Tesla, that'll get a little easier. Again, and just to sort of back up what that person was, the sentiment is like, I also don't disagree with, fighting fraud, waste, and abuse. We've been trying to do it for years and kind of hasn't worked. So I'm open to the idea that we could do it in a different way. But with defense specifically, it's like, come on, man. Like, let's not do this in a way that's so disruptive that we can't get basic work done. And oh, by the way, protect the interests of the country, which is what the military is supposed to do.
Yeah, there's a process. The Department of Defense is notoriously unable to pass an audit because it doesn't really know where all of its money is going, or at least it claims that. I'm not privy to some of the secure stuff there. But there would seem to be a process that if you really wanted to tackle fraud, waste, and abuse within the Defense Department, everybody that served in the military knows that it exists and it should be tackled. And there's
totally
much better ways to do budgeting.
Totally.
But
totally.
There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And this sure doesn't feel like the right way currently.
Yeah. Yeah. The other one you brought up was about the tariffs. But Lindsey Graham getting behind tariffs that are climate positive is a puzzle to me. I don't understand why he would get behind it, and I don't understand the mechanisms really. But what I'll say is, this is the appropriate use of tariffs. If you have a specific objective and you want to twist somebody's arm, great. That's what tariffs are for in my mind. What is being done broadly by the administration, by Trump, is an experiment. Again, I've said this before too. I'm hopeful that he knows something we all don't. I'm very skeptical of that. And I think the markets and business leaders and others have all sort of given him pretty strong feedback that he doesn't know better. But, fingers crossed that this works out and we all are a lot richer, like he says. But what I can say confidently is that this specific use of tariffs to accomplish a very targeted objective makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, here. One of the things I've been, I'm not a politician by any stretch, but one of the things that's always been interesting to me is I am very interested in the climate. I've been very focused on it. I've been tracking this for a while. And as the parties have kind of retreated to their corners and people tend to be more ideologically polarized, one of the places where that actually breaks down is on climate. I saw this piece a little while back that talked about that Democrats being soft on defense was kind of hung about their neck in the 50s, and it's taken decades for them to kind of work through that, and it still is something that just kind of hangs with them. And that there was a similar thing that was potentially going to be hung around the necks of Republicans, because climate is a continuously advancing thing, whether we like it to or not. At this point, it's just a fact of physics. And so when you look at the demographics of certain ideological positions, Republicans are on one side, Democrats tend to be on the other side, but within the Republican camp, where it falls apart is between older Republicans and younger Republicans on climate. And that younger Republicans really want to see climate action happening, and are generally dissatisfied with what has been happening. They obviously have it like a different way that they'd like to do it, whether it be like it's things like this, for example, is one example that they would want to be doing. Market-based solutions, incentives, tax cuts, are kind of part of their broad scope of vision. So it's a little bit different than what you'd see on the Democrat side of things, but they do want action on climate. And so on my previous podcast, when I was, the climate dad, I I talked about that actually as my prediction for one of my predictions for 2025 was that I was thinking that there was a way to kind of cut the Gordian knot of climate, which was going to be tariffs being used for climate outcomes. And so we'll see. Uh, I generally am not a fan of Lindsey Graham, but in this particular case, I hope he's wildly successful because we need to be doing something there. And I think the more important part is that like this will tie environmental outcomes to positive environmental outcomes and positive American outcomes. I think as a potential outcome.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I'm hopeful that as you say, that he's wildly successful. I'm also hopeful that there is some level of common ground here. We politicize the issue unnecessarily. I mean, if you look back at Reagan and Bush 1, the elder Bush, there was a lot of agreement on things like environmental protection and climate change. If you talk to people in, Wyoming, where Heirloom is, my company, I get this all the time. Like, I'm an environmentalist. I'm in the Republican Party. I'm an environmentalist. I live in Wyoming because I love being in open spaces. I love being in nature. I love hunting. I love fishing. I love being in the environment. And of course, I want a clean environment. So I think there is a ton of common ground here. It has gotten way too political. And this is I guess that's the other thing I want to say here is like, if this is a sign that there's openness to collaboration, whatever they call bipartisan across the aisle partnerships, great. Let's do that.
Yeah, here. The one caveat I would say to that is I always take it a little bit with a grain of salt when somebody says, I'm really for this. And I was like, well, what have you done? Show me the proof in the pudding here. Like, have you called your representative or senator and said that you care about climate, or is that the 10th on your list and you're just saying this to feel better? Like what have you done? Do something about it if you really care about it.
Yeah. Well, and then on that last topic, which is the retrenchment of VC into the more traditional hubs. I mean, also, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of sort of what they call crossover funds, private equity funds who, private equity invests in, ongoing business concerns, buyouts and things like that. VC is focused on early stage companies. And there were crossover funds like PE funds that started doing some VC investing, started doing some investing in earlier stage companies. That's also starting to dry up. And this is all just a sign that, I hate to say it, folks, but everybody sees a recession coming. People are retrenching to safer bets. That means back to their sort of home base in private equity. That means going back to their sort of private equity roots. And if you're a VC and you were going to Austin and Denver and other places that were not traditional VC hubs, you're going back to San Francisco and New York and Boston and LA, maybe, that none of that's good news for the startup scene.
Yeah, it's, and I'd put that in the American thing. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago as far as one of the things that this country does really, really well is innovation and startups. And there is definitely something to be said about having ecosystems, which is why, Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley. But there's a lot of talent in this country, a lot of talent. A lot of it exists between the coasts. And if we are not fostering that growth, like we are losing the opportunity for the United States to lead. And it also like worries me kind of like internal to the United States, the idea of the haves and the have-nots continues to be a coastal versus non-coastal issue. I think that's, bad for our politics. It's bad for our country. There's just a lot of like not good about this, in my opinion.
Yeah. Holy shit, man. I will say this is a national security issue. Like in the early stage VC world, the way I think of it is that the idea is worth something. The idea for the new company is worth something, sure, but it's primarily about capital and execution. Do you have the capital necessary to put an idea actually build it into a company, and can you execute it as a team? And what we're doing right now, when I say retrenching, we're stripping all of that capital away. We're making immigration harder, which means bringing the talent to the United States. that has been a good complement. A lot of our startups have been uh, immigration, teams of mixed folks, both U.S. and immigrants, and the capital markets, meaning the ability for investors to put money into these early stage companies, and also research dollars from the government has had this partnership with places like Harvard and the university systems more broadly. It feels like we're pulling the rug out from underneath ourselves. Like, our power comes from our economy. Our national security is driven from our economic prowess. And if we can't innovate, if we can't if we don't have a thriving early stage venture ecosystem, we're not going to have the economic advantages that we've enjoyed so far. So this is, to me, one of the more worrying things that has come out of the last few months is the national security implications of the kneecapping of our early stage venture community. It's just getting started, and it's very likely to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Yeah, I think it's worth also pointing out that there are the long-term effects of this. This is not going to be felt as immediately as you might imagine, because there's still some inertia in the system. But the largest companies in the world, the ones that have generated all the wealth, were founded between 20 and 40 years ago in an ecosystem that was built 40 to 60 years ago. So the system that we're building now is going to be the system that is creating or not the world leading companies of the future. And to your point, execution requires talent, and it requires capital. And so if capital is retrenching to places that are a little bit more capital friendly, but and has some concentrations of talent, it's going to continue to drive a have and have not scenario. But the overall, the system will be the poorer for it.
Yeah.
So
scary, man.
On the plus side, things continue to go into climate tech, which I'm kind of excited about. We'll see about how much of that is just kind of inertia. We're still in the early days of Trump 2.0 here, but how much of that's just inertia in the system, and how much of that is the resiliency of climate tech as a sector. Climate tech is a very, very broad. It's everything from, companies like me who are directly in climate to companies that are more, very, very tangential to it, but energy tech companies such as yourself. And most of the money has been going into those more industrial scenarios. But I think that drives that shows a need for the companies that are being built in this sector outside of the United States, at least, and then also here within the United States by kind of corporations that need these services, regardless of what's happening at the federal policy level.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had my negative pants on before. I'll put my positive pants on for a minute.
Yeah.
I'm actually really encouraged by that data of the VC money that's being invested. It's really going into three sectors primarily. I mean, there's lots of different sectors, but the bigger ones, one, obviously AI, well over half of the dollars being invested right now is going into AI. Two is defense tech. I'll come back to that. And three is energy, climate. And the reason for the third one is because it's a huge economic opportunity. There's going to be some like $60 trillion spent to transition the economy, to first grow the grid, meaning energy generation and delivery is going to triple in the next 25 years. Triple. It's been built over the last 100 plus years. And in the next 25 years, it's going to triple. That's driven by population growth, electrification, data centers that are being driven by AI implementations, et cetera. I mean, just the massive amounts of capital that need to go into building that infrastructure, both building the technology and improving the technology, is on a scale we just haven't seen. And it's a huge opportunity. And so that's driving that sector of investment. On the defense tech front, I think there is a recognition that the US military isn't able to innovate as fast as it needs to, especially in the software era. And so there's more dollars being put into innovation software and otherwise, but into innovation, quote unquote, dual use really just means military applications. Because the way we've been innovating, for the last 25 years, let's say, when you came up with a new fighter jet or something like that, it was the military would say, we need this capability. And then the primes, Northrop Grumman or Raytheon, whatever, would try to meet that requirement. But now the military doesn't even know what it needs. It doesn't know what it wants because technology is moving so fast. It can't identify a requirement because it doesn't even know what's possible. And so what's driving innovation now are early stage founders, just like we always have. We come up with the ideas, we source a little bit of capital to prove that that idea has legs, and we go find venture capital that can carry us forward. That's happening now pretty at an accelerating pace, I'll say, because if we're going to keep up with the likes of China and others, we're going to have to innovate faster. Just to be frank about it, we're getting our asses kicked right now on that front, but it's getting better. And the military is getting better at opening up pathways to, one, identify new tech and then bring it inside the U.S. military. Not fast enough yet, still very clunky, but getting better. And so those sectors, I think, are hot for a good reason. And to come bring it right back to the story, I think I'm really encouraged by the recognition that this, climate, energy, et cetera, is an attractive place to put a bet right now, given all of the other market uncertainty. So
I think there's actually a lot of interrelated between those three topics, between AI, climate and climate/energy and defense, which is to say, like Heirloom, your company has defense applications. We've talked about those before. AI feeds into kind of the innovation side of things. We use it here at Acclimate for climate tech. And then it's obviously going to be AI is definitely part of the defense tech scene here. About like how can you make rapid decisions in combat environments is always been a key to military success, and so like how AI feeds into this. So here's to keeping those three sectors alive and well, because they're really important both for international security, but also for kind of American leadership. So, Neil, how about you introduce our guest here? We've got Jim Grossman that's going to be joining us here in a minute, right?
Yeah, super excited to have Jim on. I've known him for about 10 years. He, grew up in Arizona, played football at the University of Arizona, and then played professional baseball. And then he had to transition. He had to figure out what was next. And his transition was tough. And I should mention that he doesn't really like me saying using the word transition because he talks about a progression, but and he'll explain that. But his transition or progression helped him understand how what those component pieces are, and then he's since been helping professional athletes transition out of being a player into whatever's next. I met him about 10 years ago. I'm a Tillman Scholar, which is the Pat Tillman Foundation. And he came to one of the conferences and we started talking about the correlation between the transition of a professional athlete and a military veteran and how those two communities might learn from each other. So super excited to talk to him about, what his work has encompassed, how he's helped professional athletes, people retiring from Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NHL, and how we can help veterans with their transitions. Veterans have a really hard time coming home from combat, coming out of the military, figuring out what's next. The veteran suicide rate is still too high. And we hope that, we can learn some lessons between the communities and make things better for military veterans and theirs alike.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Jim Grossman, welcome to Hardpoints.
Thank you, Neil. We're privileged to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Well, so we are going to talk about transition today. I know you don't like that word very much, and we'll get into that, but we're going to talk about the transition of military veterans from active duty to whatever's next. And elite athletes from their playing days into whatever's next. But before we get into all that, would love to hear your backstory, sort of your athletic career and how you got interested in this topic. So can you just kind of start from, your early days and give us a sense of how you got interested in the topic?
Absolutely. So my story really begins in the beginning. I was born and raised in Arizona. Grew up on the Mexican border in Arizona. My father was a rural doctor, and I was like just pretty much any of what I would at least refer to as typical kid in terms of athletics. I played everything I could. The more spastic, the better. Team oriented, and so it was, like most of quote unquote my kind. It starts like around 6 years old, if not sooner. And so I was fascinated. It was just there. And then, you know, so there was the sports aspect of things. And then, I think much to my mother's probably displeasure, I had this kind of curiosity with how to deconstruct things. So she would, find disassembled pens and an occasional toaster. And, I was just kind of fascinated with the idea of deconstructing to understand how things work. What was annoying to her, I didn't have the same fascination with putting things back together. So, at any rate, and then, my father is a rural doctor, and I was just fascinated by the idea of the intensity of his intent to have an impact on someone else's life. And so that was, the earliest roots of who I am. And then, um, but the seminal event of my life was my brother's death. I was barely 17 years old. He was barely 15 years old and was taken by a drunk driver. And, I grew up in a family where family was everything. So it was completely disorienting and devastating. And so I think that and so many, and it's informed virtually every aspect of my life, but, um, you know, it, it, it was what I come to find later on, the frame of which I see through, which is this idea of life altering change and the impact of what it means to have to reconstruct the life on the other side of either some event, some decision, whatever it may be, and the challenge. And that's the root of my kind of, you know, distrust, at least with the term transition, because to me, transition infers this kind of lateral shift from one thing to another, where you're using the same skill set, knowledge, and situational awareness to being in a situation where none of that has any relevance whatsoever, and it has to be reconstructed. So, and it doesn't happen in a blink of an eye. So, you know, that's basically the foundation. And I was fortunate enough to find myself, playing major college football. And I had two very close friends of mine who were kind of laid out this thing that I found fascinating, which was one of them literally built a shrine to the Dallas Cowboys and flunked out of every college every year because it had nothing to do with the job he was seeking through college, right? And the other was with me in business law classes. And I just looked at the two of them and thought they're both incredibly capable people. And on the one, I'm going, dude, you're 6'9", 285 pounds. If you can't express what made you who you are, they're not going to trust you can walk and chew gum at the same time. So that was my window that really anchored everything for me. And then one summer, we all went away, and they both went and played in the NFL, and I was fortunate enough to go play baseball professionally. And then, as averages have a way of playing themselves out, 4 years came. I had blown my knee out in the interim at a time when that was a career-ending injury. But my fascination started with those two guys in college, right? The injury, and it precipitated all the things that we go through when something knocks us out of our routine, right? And but by the same token, it was watching what happened to these guys. And what didn't happen was fascinating. And so I was out of baseball for 2 years. Didn't think I was going to get a chance to go back because of the injury. And then I got an opportunity to go back, but I was really more fascinated at the time, which was deconstructing what's going on here. What is it? Why is it that everyone around me cannot seem to, come to terms with the idea that I've got to prepare myself for something on the other side?
So did those two guys that you were at the University of Arizona at the time, right? You were all three playing for the Wildcats, and you saw this contrast, right? So that got you sort of thinking about it. And was it then personal for you in your own transition? I know you don't like that word again, but your own transition out of professional baseball?
It transitioned for me. I had basically found something else. When I literally at the end of my baseball career, which was, I might add, very indistinguished, it was, I went up to Mike Hargrove, my manager, and just said, because I'm just basically in baseball, so can I play at that level? And he said, yeah, but you got to wait your turn. And I was surprised because I didn't think he was going to say yes. But he said, you got to wait your turn. And I literally at that time, I said, I know what I want to do. I'm going to be a part of baseball. And so it was easy to let go. And this is the crux of the issue. There's a stage in one's, developmental progression where, because it's circular, there's a stage that I would refer to as the release, where, and ideally it's 2 years before you are actually leave, because it takes time to be prepared and to build the foundation of a life to go that leads from there.
Okay. So then how did that interest in professional athletes figuring out what's next sort of bring you to the connection to military veterans having to make a move from active duty into whatever's next?
Well, so first of all, let me say that part of my brother's, and I apologize for this, but my brother's experience, right, was understanding death, and coming to understand it and not be afraid of it, but appreciating what it has to teach. When you understand, from my vantage point, when somebody goes into the service and puts their life on the line, and really fundamentally understanding what that sacrifice might be, I just don't think this country does as good a job as it should with treating veterans. And so, pardon my French, I just fucking want to help. And that's what led me there. And I, had the good fortune of being around a number of special operators, and it was, again, fascinating because the things were very similar, kind of the mirror image. And most critically, the most devastating aspect of this inability to effectively, quote unquote, transition is isolation. And in that isolation is where the devastation becomes greatest. And you become great at something by being very critical of what you're doing. And so that criticality doesn't just turn off when you're done. And the inclination is to basically, if you don't realize it's just a fundamental part of the journey, it feels like it's deeply personal, and it makes one feel, because we have to ascribe, some cause, is that we are inadequate. And that's not the case at all.
Yeah. So I sort of put it in these terms. We've all, or most of us anyway, have seen that, Brett Favre had to retire 4 times, and Tom Brady retired 3 times and actually came out of retirement to win a Super Bowl. I mean, there's a reason why these great players just can't put it down, can't let it go. And those folks at the top of their game get a chance to go back and have a redo, or at least a retry. But I'll sort of put it in these terms. When you've worked most of your youthful life towards something, and you've done everything you can to prepare to be really good at something, And then you get to join a team to do that thing. And you and your team are doing really important things where people are writing news stories about you and the lights are shining bright on what you're doing. And your life may even be in danger. You're putting yourself at physical risk in some cases. And then one day the lights just go out. And in sports, that's you can't play anymore. In the military, that's you've got to put down your arms and go figure out whatever's next. But what I find really fascinating about what you work on is that, I described those two things as one thing and you could apply it equally to each community. Did I get that about right? Or do you think of it differently or?
No, not at all. I think you're dead on. And the reality of that, and by the way, if anyone wants to look at, I think, a great expression of that, a number of years ago when the Kelsey brothers were playing each other in the Super Bowl, there was a little documentary done. Just watch what Jason Kelsey goes through. And it's as good a window as you're going to find. Right. And so, and this is this is where transition simply does not measure up. Right. Because you walk into this vacancy and as I would like to say, we spend our lives on both sides of that coin, in a state of becoming, right? We are completely foreign of this idea of being in a state of being where we're not doing anything. And all that energy that makes us need to go through that, the grind, so to speak, but it's the relentless pursuit of perfection. Let's do it.
Yeah. So let me take a stab at the veteran side of the void, which is, I'm in combat with my team in Iraq, for example. And again, the New York Times is writing news stories about us. And one of my buddies almost gets shot. We're in the fight and everything I do is really important. And I rely on my teammate to do his part and I do my part. And at the end of it, we come home together. But then very shortly after, I have to get out. And where I was with a team of people who were not only my professional satisfaction, but really my community service, my athletic outlet, my sense of community, my sense of self, that all gets turned off. And then I'm sitting in a room and I've had to move home. So I've got my friends from high school, but I haven't hung out with them for 4 years and they don't know what I just went through. So now I'm sort of on an island where nobody really understands what I went through. And I'm making sense of what I went through, but I don't have anybody to talk to that really understands it. And so I'm sitting in a cold, dark room. And that's when on the veteran side, things can get pretty ugly. People turn to alcohol. They turn to, sometimes they're already on meds because the doctor prescribed them some sort of opiate. And so the opiates help, at least temporarily. And this leads to, in the veteran context, the very high rate of suicide that we've seen with veterans. So what's the parallel on the athletic side? And, I'm saying elite athlete, because I know you work with the NFLPA and you've worked with Major League Baseball and the NHL, but this is also Olympians and, others that don't sort of immediately come to mind. You mentioned your friend at the University of Arizona. That person also spent all the way up until probably 22, even if they don't go to the NFL, these collegiate athletes also spend a lot of time preparing. And then they've got a dream to go to the NFL, but the 0.5% of the football players actually get there. So anyway, I just what's the parallel, to that veteran experience that I laid out?
Let me just say this. I don't know that I can express it as well as you just did. It's exactly the same. And I think so you look at the determinants, right? One of the key things is that, and I beg your opinion here, but we're affective people. We have to believe it in order to see it, right? The rest of the world has to see it in order to believe it. And so it's an affective response that we have to, which I think is where the potential devastation comes in, because it's, as you so effectively put it, when you're in that dark room and you're left alone with yourself and you're left alone with your mind, right? If, this is something, and then, if there's a PTSD diagnosis, all these things and you have no outlet, right? And you have been personally eviscerated because your identity has no place, right? And um and and I think very critically in both worlds, we just look at there's a vastly different appreciation for those who do and those who don't do it anymore, right? So that all those feedback arrows come back at you, they make you feel extraordinarily bad, right? You don't want to. Let's just say unwelcome, and then the opioids, any number of different avenues of um, inappropriate, ineffective behavior become the means of distraction. And then
is
allowed to just
this
go on.
Sorry, is this? I remember a story you told me of a player that once they got out of playing would just drive every day as a way to sort of. There was I'm not remembering exactly what that story was.
To use his name here because I think he would. It's Andre Collins. He's the executive director of the NFLPA's Professional Athletes Foundation. Exceptional career in the NFL, 12 plus years. And he gets, if you watch what happens when guys get released, I mean, it's like put it in a garbage bag and there's the back door. And by the way, it locks on the way out, right? I don't need to come back in. And in Andre's case, because this is something he's critically interested in, he just, and by the way, it's the same thing with Gilbert Arenas. His story is the same. And I didn't do anything directly with Gilbert, or indirectly, but as he tells his story, we have part of what we lose is a routine, is the regimentation. And so, those patterns are so firmly established that years after we get done, I mean, it took decades for me to stop smelling grass in the spring, to mow grass in springtime, or the smell of glove leather. So that's Andre. That's also, I think, associated with Gilbert Arenas' response is like, you just have to have something to do. This is the real culprit here. I don't have a meaningful pursuit. And that becomes this, this weight around your waist that can ultimately become the anchor. It takes you down the bottom of the drain. And
I'm just in the hopes of just painting the picture here. It was a video you sent me. So it was, he would wake up in the morning, he'd have breakfast, and then he'd get in the car and drive to the grocery store. And then he'd drive for a couple hours, and then he'd come home and he'd have lunch. And that was a big event. And then he'd get in the car in the afternoon and drive for another 2-3 hours until people came home. And it's sort of, I just want to make sure everybody understands the sort of extreme nature of this. You'd think, you've got, this particular player was, as you say, had a great career. He had millions of dollars in the bank. He didn't have to work, but he didn't know what to do with himself. And he was manifesting that loneliness and lack of purpose into quite literally just driving every day. And I heard this story. I've had a bunch of experiences with veterans, and it manifests itself in different ways, but this one was really super clear of just how hard this is because of what he chose to do with his day, which was literally like eat, drive for 2 or 3 hours, come home and eat, drive for 2 or 3 hours. And that didn't go on for like a week. That was like 3 years of his life. And I still, when I tell the story, I get emotional about it because I just, like, the amount of pain and discomfort that he must have been feeling to do that, not for a week or two, but for years. To me, it expresses sort of a problem that, we have to grapple with. So Mike, I cut you off before. Sorry about that. What'd you have, brother?
Yeah, what I was thinking about when you were talking about that, Jim and Neil, was the idea of how it resonated a little bit with my life. And Jim, you talked about that there was like ideally about 2 years out, you start to kind of recognize that you're approaching the end of this phase of life. And that's something that I've been fortunate enough to have, which is my last tour on active duty was out of the cockpit. I was living in Italy with my wife. We started our family. It was like this really great experience, but it was also like this farewell tour to the Navy. And then when I left the Navy, active duty, I was still a reservist, and that allowed me to kind of still get a little bit of that Navy vibe. Uh, and I had, like, in many ways, the easiest move into civilian life possible. I had a great family, moved to where I wanted, got to be able to kind of start a job that I wanted, and it was still incredibly lonely and isolating. Um, and so I wanted to talk about two things, for people that aren't as fortunate as I am, or either as professional athletes or as military. What are some best practices? How can they start to think about this? And if they've already gone through it, like, what are some ways that they can find community? One of the big things that I'm particularly concerned about is how easy it has been for veterans in particular to be called to violent extremism. And that, like, they find community with the biggest assholes on the planet. And so how do we keep these people from having this loneliness that could end up killing them? Or that can drive them into the arms of a community that, like, is not who they are, who they want to be, in finding kind of this false mission.
Great, great perspective there. And so, it, and this is to me the ultimate solution is that, and I'm going to digress for a minute here, but the idea, so, if you can visualize with me the idea that you're wearing a jersey and it's got a number on the front, a number on the back, right? And that number on the front, from your own experiences and our own experiences, is the number of reps we have to have that prepares us to do what we want to do, right? And you can't disregard the number of reps that were required to figure it out what it is that you wanted to do before you built the ability to do it. And so I think indistinguishably, there has to be time spent in what I would refer to as the exploratory phase, right? So it begins with, how do I help someone figure out what else is there? Because I think there are basically three fundamental forces that are at play in both of our communities, or just the idea of, of mastery is a process, which we all we are the object of process. I think this is one of the real problems, right? Is that we're told what to do and no one really asks us for how we want to do it. They just get it done, right? And then passion. And, that process is the race car, if you will. The passion is the fuel that, unless it gets into that race car, it's a paperweight for the most part, right? And then thirdly is the 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 reps, the adaptive requirements to be able to pursue and feel. And this is, I think, is one of the most important things I can say, because I think it gets to the point of that clarity that there's something in life that's not, these aren't, I would argue, psychopaths or sociopaths. These are people who are frustrated, angry with where they've ended up. But we all exist in this spectrum between what our goal is, this deeply held thing we want to achieve, and where we think we are in terms of our progression towards that, right? And it's, once you feel like you're on this spectrum, then every rep makes sense because it feels like I'm moving closer to that thing. And I think, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, the destination really doesn't, is really not the driving force. It's the path, right? And then it's then assembling the people around you that to cultivate what, this thing that I want. And the beauty and the paradox in this is that, and I'll just say, guys don't realize how to do that. And it's like, but by saying there's this paradox here, the opportunity lies within the paradox because you've already done it. So the idea is to present this path in an intuitive manner so that it basically resonates with the instincts that come from the extensive experiences we've had that drives us, that impels us towards this goal, right? Our mission.
I love that. In my Navy Reserve work, I did a lot of funerals. Actually, I was a military funeral. I'd fold up a flag and say on behalf of a grateful nation, usually to the deceased's widow. And the one thing that almost never got talked about was what people did for a job. It was what they did and how they made the people around them feel and about the community. And so, like, this identity, I think this, it of course, speaks to veterans. I think it speaks to professional athletes that are moving on to the next phase of their life. But I think it speaks to all adults, especially men. I think we as men sometimes feel this need to go out and prove ourselves into the world, and to recognize that the people in your life love you regardless of what you're achieving, and that your identity is, to borrow a phrase from the Marine Corps, is to embrace the suck, which is to be focused on the reps, the work that you're doing right now. That is where the identity is you're the person that is doing the work. The accolades will follow or not, but it does not change your value as an individual. And the most important part is to be with the people that are in your life. And if you don't have people in your life, to find some meaningful thing to be a part of, where there are people in your life that you can share it with.
Of course, I didn't do it one at a time. I'm going through every device I have to mute on. I'm sorry. Let me just make this one point because I think it's really critical, and that is how we work and the tribal nature of that. And I mean that in the most honorable way possible, right? It's that because I think, and particularly for a man, there's this evolutionary echo where there is nothing, I think, more welcome than to be able to go out and counter danger as in the hunt, right? And to realize that there is someone who is authentically dedicated to your back, right? To go out and to have that sense. I think it's intoxicating. And that's, I think, another key element to the fabric of both sides of this coin. And so when you go out into a world, and Mike, you also brought up a really special point too, which is isolation is this idea that nobody understands what I'm trying to say because you just don't have the experience to be able to access it. And that was the case in my brother's death. I was like in a room full of people, and it's like, holy smokes! And I think of Junior Seau, and isolation is the last ditch before the fabric comes apart. And so, but it's all that becomes lost, right? And the idea of recreating that is not as simple as it sounds, right?
Yeah, I just want to pick up. I just want to pick up on something because that crystallized for me in a way that I don't think I've ever drawn it together, which is the flip side of having a team that you can go to war with. In the military sense, literally go to war. But in the athletic sense, it's, like when you're playing football, your buddy better do his job or you're going to get creamed in a lot of cases, right? So it's
a figurative death, right? Which is
100%
no means equates to what you guys go through. But
but I mean, I've done both. I can say that there is correlation. It's not the same level, and I don't want to equate it, but there is correlation there that to your point, when there's almost nothing more powerful as a man to go on a football field, knowing that you and your buddies are going to war with the guys on the other side of the line of scrimmage. That is like one of the most visceral feelings I've ever had, is the feeling of power and ability that comes with that team doing stuff together violently against those other dudes. That was an amazing experience. Similar some of the most powerful feelings I've ever had is going out on patrol with a bunch of dudes with firearms to go do harm to others. Like, that was really powerful. But the flip side, what I'm trying to articulate here that you just articulated, I think is finally clicking for me, is that when that is taken away, it's all the more devastating that it's not there anymore, and you don't have an avenue to pursue that or to have that feeling of belonging and purpose, and that somebody else has got your back.
I think I'd even add to that, which is the idea of, like, as you talk about your brother's death, Jim, which is like there's some very similar feelings of death associated with this and having to rebuild a life afterwards. And just this loss of identity and who has your back. And so I think there's just a lot of very overlapping and strong feelings here that, like, I think you've been able to put, a pretty fine point upon.
It's, and Neil, the term you use that I think is so appropriate, it's potentially devastating, right? And now I'm going to get a little bit out there for a moment, but, part of my, coming to terms with my brother's death was some, repressed grief counseling. But what I learned from that about myself, which I think extends to every human being at this point, is that we're fundamentally made of three components, right? Our mind, right? Our heart, the mind it just needs something to do, right? Your heart is that primal aspect of attraction and fear. And then to me, it's the soul, which is the authentic, it is the residue of who we really are. And that speaks in a whisper, right? It's very difficult to access. And the insults we're talking about don't happen at the heart. They don't happen at the head. The head's trying to figure it out, but it's at the soul. And in the inability to commune with someone else at that level is really challenging. And the idea, and it's challenging to kind of even get there, because the brain your mind wants to go and say, no, whatever, yeah, what have you. But it's the idea of, because let me just say, the fruit of my effort of going back into baseball and the exploratory exercise that was for me, it came back with one overwhelming answer, and that's fear, right? And it's so counterintuitive that you have some of the bravest souls on the planet that will stare death in the face and that will not raise their hand up.
Yeah.
Because of this tribal aspect of say, I cannot be the shame that comes upon this unit.
I didn't, my experience there was, I was oblivious to it. To your point about it being in the head, I came back, got out, my transition was to go to grad school, and I just thought everything was fine. I didn't acknowledge the below the surface emotional side of it at all. It came out later. And part of what came out later then became problematic, but this is, I think also resonant in what you just described is the key for me. Once I uncovered all of the sort of below the surface emotional stuff was, wow, I'm reacting in all these awful ways. But that's predictable. I'm a human being that went through a set of experiences, and my reaction is perfectly normal in some, I didn't understand it. It didn't feel normal to me. I thought there was a problem with me and my behaviors as I was acting them out. But in reality, like once I got into PTSD counseling, for example, they were just saying, no, like if you go through this, here are the things you can expect to happen. And I just checked every box. I was like, yep, I did that. I do this. I do that. And just the knowledge that I was going through a very normal human response to, whether it was the violence of war or the transition out of the military, that was super powerful to me to get my head and heart connected. Pivot a little bit to what you're working on now. I'd love to hear a bit about sort of what you've been working on for the last, 20 years or so? And what's your current effort? What are you hoping to accomplish? Who are you, hoping to reach? And, just take us through a little bit of your current effort.
Okay, so I've got two projects that I'm dealing with right now, and the one that I've been I've done a lot of work within indigenous communities, and the wisdom that resides there is spectacular, right? And so Benji Medlock and her husband Philip, Benji's Polynesian and does a lot of critical work here with Polynesian athletes and coming to understand that indigenous culture and the extraordinary, benefits of being within it. So I've supported Benji's effort to establish a foundation that is now in existence. It's the Ainga Foundation, which is Samoan for broader family, which is basically what we're talking about here for Polynesian athletes. And it has to do with exactly what we're talking about, taking those kids that are going to be, and, and so above all else, right, the answer is going to reside in a longitudinal response because the number on your back, the one you don't see, is the number of reps required to get to where you need to get on the other side, right? You can't avoid them. The uncertainty is there, but the reps have to be there. And so it's the idea of the sooner you start, and the progression is basically it starts with awareness, inspiration, understanding, and then most critically in both of our worlds, knowledge isn't what gets it done, right? It's the experience and the feedback from the experience. So the idea in that particular endeavor is to support these Polynesians and the incredible role they can play within their own communities, their own regions, to support that in their off-field development, which I think is, to me, is very cool stuff. But then the thing that is just, and it's fundamental to everything I do is long ago, I realized there's too few of us, right, to have kind of a going concern that, that can work at scale and to great a no technology, no way to connect. The things we're talking about, very difficult to do when everyone's spread out all over the world for the most part, and the numbers are relatively few. But if you go all the way back, if you look at it from an ecosystem standpoint, it's in the tens and globally hundreds of millions, right? So the answer to me is emerging digital technology, not as AI per se as the answer, but it's AI in service to a format that is familiar to everyone we would otherwise touch. And utilizing its incredible intelligence, its creativity, its efficiency, and its scalability is what I'm in it to my last breath. But I think we can think about this now in ways you couldn't even begin to touch 2 years ago. And so much of it has to do with the early stages of how do you create awareness? The things that two guys of your capability, are still figuring out. I mean, can you imagine how difficult it is for someone who's just an average human being, right? That's going through the exact same thing, right? So the idea about AI and adaptive algorithms and all that stuff is it's process that meets the individual needs, that whose creative expression is enough to get your attention and to get you onto that spectrum so that you can be in a process where the reps can be brought to you in a classic distribution where the powerful thing about all this is that it's 20% of the reps have 80% of the influence of, impact and success. The idea is to take majority of those reps, put them in a digital environment. So, in the depth of night, when, the demons come to haunt us, there's a place to turn. There's a place to look. There's a place to plug in, and a place that can ultimately come to know me as well as anything on the planet. And then to be able to, craft that next rep. So, that can proverbially put the rails in front of the train as it's moving.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
So I hope that makes some sense on some level, but I think that's the ultimate answer. And this new era is what ushers it in.
let's talk just briefly about, you talked about that there was three things. It was process, passion, and repetition. Did I get that correct, Jim?
Well, it is. Yeah, because it's the term I use is adaptation, because it's that process has the feedback arrow.
Got it. So, so if those are kind of the three steps, and we've talked a lot about repetition there, what is like some of the process? Like, how do people identify the process that they need to be working through? Do you have any like practical tips associated with that?
Well, to me, I think the beauty in all this is an elegant simplicity, right? And that simplicity is, it's the same process you use as a 6-year-old that you use when you're a 36-year-old. You can say this in sports, right? It's looking at it, understanding it in terms of a game, right? So there's a point to the game. And no matter what you do, I think in life, you can basically gamify it at some level and come to realize there are rules of the game, both written and unwritten rules, that determine the skills, knowledge, and situational awareness required to succeed. And then taking that information, and the next step is preparation, practice, right? Because the next step is then, and this is what happens on a, middle school baseball field, right? Then you take, you, you practice, you have that experience, and then you break it down. And it's in the breaking it down that we all looking for that next incremental delta between where I am and where I want to go. And it's identifying that delta, right? And then gets shipped right back into the practice piece. And it's that relentless pursuit of perfection.
Before you can even get to the process side, then you have to have a figure of where you want to go. So you need to have a target, it sounds like. And so how any practical recommendations as far as like somebody that is approaching a major like life change, or having recently gone through one, how do they identify their target? Where do they want to go? So they're not coming out of retirement 3 times, and getting divorced from their wife, or worse, right? Like how do they find that target so they go do the next thing, and have a better, move into the next phase?
That's the ultimate question, right? So there's what you have to do is you have to go beyond where you are right now. And I think you have to work on what I would refer to as 2 skills, right? Curiosity and imagination. Because it begins by trying to understand what it is that you're interested in, right? And so there are assessment instruments you can take. But the challenge is in the way we come to what we do, so much of that cultural aspect is demanding focus and a narrower and narrower focus. So we don't have much experience outside of the world we come from. And the challenge is, because we don't have that, you have to budget for time and experience. And so, but all you're trying to do is, put your head on a swivel, and anything that grabs your attention. It's basically going through a progression where you have to, so you're just fishing. You got to throw your line in the water and find something that I'm interested in, and then be curious enough about it to kind of probe deeper. But let me just say this, before all that, you have to be crystal clear on the process that made you who you are. Because the ultimate poetry in this is everything you need to do, you've already done, right? You have to go back to that playground and understand why, when I was playing kickball or whatever it is, what was it? Something drew you to something else. And passion, for one place to look, is things where you have great interest or great pain, right? Because you have to reach a deeper level of attraction in order to ultimately, find that place that's going to allow you to let go of what you don't want to let
So
go of.
basically, so basically what you're saying is all the things that made Mike a great fighter pilot will also make him a great tech CEO. Yeah? Same?
Precisely.
I wasn't that great of a fighter pilot, so we'll have to see how good of a CEO I've become.
As long as you want to, right? Because that's the driver. It's the race car is great, right? You guys are all the race cars, and the most dynamic race cars, right? And but the question is what goes in that tank? And then the adaptation is simply to track. And then once you find that out, but it's really about looking at life as and the beauty of it is, it's really difficult, for some people who've never been through what we go through in terms of development. We understand it intimately in a way that's not even, verbal. And it's just recreating the process. There's an elegant simplicity to all of this. But if you don't budget the time and you defer those reps, to the back end of that 2-year window or on the other side of that window, the challenge is you got to learn how to swim when you're drowning. And the emotional vacancies and all those things that you guys eliminated, they can overwhelm one. And then you're either on a path to the highest common denominator or the lowest common denominator. And the beauty of it is, to anyone, I would say, and I can't tell you how many guys I've worked with who, were, pardon my French, shitty students, go back to school because there's something they actually want to study. And to their amazement, they become straight A students.
I was a way better student in grad school. That's for sure. But Jim, as we wrap up here, super grateful for you being here. Also would love your sort of comments just briefly on what you and I are working on together, which is, so I'm have the honor to be a Tillman Scholar. You have been working with some elite athletes. We're going to sort of hopefully bring some military veterans and some elite athletes together to sort of collaborate on these topics and see where those collaborations might lead us. I mean, it's built on your, 20 plus years of work. But just sort of curious if you could say a few words on, the prospects of that. I'm, privileged to be in the spot I am as a facilitator, but you're really the heart and soul behind it. What are you hoping for out of that collaboration, and where are you taking it?
Well, Neil, it all begins with you. So I would contest the idea that you are the heart and soul of this. But
I'm just facilitating, Jim. But you go ahead. You're
so. I met Pat Tillman years ago when I had already left the U of A and went into ASU's locker room. For anybody who understands what that means, was, it was a bit shocking for me, and I'm sure a few of them as well. But, Pat came up to me after we were done speaking. Him, Jake Plummer, came up to me afterwards and just were so gracious, right? But then I look at Pat Tillman, right, as so my brother's death left me with this obligation to do something with the life that he did not get a chance to live. And to me, that in so many ways just embodies who Pat was, right? And so, and then through, getting to know Kill and what that's all about. And then, I don't, I hate to say this, right, but when I met you, that felt almost preordained to me. And that was, 10 plus years ago. And so to me, I just think that in all we're talking about, the Tillman Foundation represents this point of expression, right, that stands behind what we're talking about, right? So as an exemplar, as a foundation that's committed, and the extraordinary scholars that come from that program. I mean, you can't measure the total impact of all all the scholars that are out there making a difference in the world. So I just look at it. We have great connections with the NFLPA. So to me, it's this hope of saying, how do we kind of help clarify? I think the key thing to keep in mind is I'm that guy, or I'm that woman who is in that 2-year window, right? And it's saying is like, I don't even know how to think about this. I don't know what to do. To be able to say, okay, here's a door to walk through, help clarify that. And I think in some way be fundamentally inclusive to all the extraordinary people that are trying to help in this space, to kind of be the mortar between the blocks, so to speak, that can mentor an individual through that journey. And I think, it's a combination of having you got to be in the same room with the other side. And then at the same time, having some technology to support it in the back end or on the front end, be able to make this difference, and then work in collaboration with all these fabulous organizations that are out there. But I think part of the challenge in the military space, there are almost so many options. And as Ed Garvey would say, too many options is no option. And be this point of clarity.
Yeah. I'm really hopeful that the two communities, the athletes and the vets, can learn from each other. Yeah. I mean, there's so many parallels, and my suspicion is that, both of those communities have the ability, if we do this right, they have the ability to sort of learn from analogy. It's one thing to say, I'm a veteran, here's my experience, and here are the things that I should learn and do better. But it's almost easier to kind of step outside yourself and say, oh, there's that other group that's going through something that's very parallel and interestingly familiar. And maybe I have some things to learn from them. And if the veterans do that to the athletes and vice versa. And then the last piece I'll add is, veterans generally, I mean, if you had asked me to think about this at all prior to going to combat, there's no chance in how I would have paid attention. I'm like 100% focused on just being good at being a pilot and or being a forward air controller. I would have given this zero attention, like a transition or thinking about the future wouldn't have dedicated any time to it. The one group, if you had brought an NFL player in I would have paid attention. I would have you would have gotten my attention. You would have gotten at least a few minutes of my time. I think, and I humbly say this, I think, elite athletes, baseball players, NFL players, may be in the same spot where you're like, they're just focused on making the team. They're just focused on being great at what they do. But they seem to be willing to stop, many of them anyway, stop and take a minute if a vet walks into the room. And so it's possible maybe that we get some attention from each of those groups earlier in the process, which I know you've said is super critical. And maybe there's an opportunity to, as I say, learn from analogy or learn through analogy. So
look, there's no question. And the idea is each is the other's metaphor for the most part, right? So there is innate respect, and so it's the idea of, and to me, the one thing that's behind this idea of like, I just want to do this, and I just want to do this, and if that's laced at all with fear that if I distract myself from it, it's going to compromise what this is, and that's all the way in the cake's baked. Because what I've learned is that you can't hold the sand so tight because it'll ultimately squeeze out sides, right? And the idea is that for everyone that is as intensely involved in what it means to be in either one of these communities, there has to be some downtime. And the idea of that, if it's not complementary, there's no point to it, right? But I believe, without question, because in the beginning, the front side of that equation is a very limited lift. It's just look around. No one's asking you to become something else. It's just the idea to say, just curiosity and imagination.
Yeah. Well, Jim, thank you so much for being here. It's a great conversation, but super insightful. I learned a ton, and I had a starting point, which I think was better than most, but I learned a few new things every time I talk to you. So really appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Hey, guys, and I think this is an overworn, but I just appreciate fundamentally who you are and what you've done, and that you're stepping up in this regard. It's just so vital. I mean, I don't know what else to say. So my hat is off to you in more ways than one.
Feelings mutual. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim.
You guys.
Wow, Neil. I really enjoyed meeting Jim there. He's a fascinating guy. Like the story about like his brother's death and about how that led him into kind of a life of meaning. I found that really interesting. I found that the story, both about like professional athletes and about veterans, like he really seemed to kind of understand that process. But I also thought that there was a lot for like everyone to learn from it. You don't have to be, an elite performer to be able to learn something from this. And I think in particular, I think it speaks to a lot of opportunities for men as what they need to be doing as far as how they need to be thinking of this process of their life moving forward.
Yeah, that was new to me. I've known him for 10 years, and I hadn't ever put that direct connection together around the, going into combat or going onto the field with somebody who's got your back. Really appreciate that comment. And yeah, he's a dedicated individual. He's truly dedicated his entire life to this endeavor, and he's doing a lot of good. I think he's got a toehold now with some really great organizations that are starting to recognize the value of what he's done and what can do with that work. So yeah, super grateful for what he does, and so glad he could join us.
Yeah, here. Well, we're at the point now here to talk about our goods, bads, and others for the week. Neil, how about you get us started?
Yeah, my good for this week is that, my dad is 85. About a year ago, I bought him a piece of software called Storyworth, and I'm not paid by Storyworth, but it's it's like $100 subscription or something. And the idea was it would prompt him to write some of his life story down. And, I gave him some prompts, and then he created some prompts on his own. At the end of the day, it'll put his story into a book. Super cool idea. But then he had 2 strokes, and it's, they were minor strokes, but still it was, difficult for him to type. It was difficult just for him to put together the energy to do the storytelling. But he finally this week sent me a story, and it was everything I'd hoped for. It was really his, from his earliest memories through to about, early high school. And it was just awesome that he had the energy. He's like recovered from the strokes enough to have the energy to be able to do it. And he took the time to do it. And I hope he's going to get enough positive feedback to do the rest of the prompts. But it was really good to get that one. My bad for this week is that the government is really slow right now. I kind of referenced this earlier. My company is trying to do a little bit of work with the government. We've applied for these SBIRs, and it's just really hard right now. And I wonder how much of the rest of industry is impacted by this. We're a tiny little company. We're not asking for a whole lot, and the individuals we're working with are amazing, but they're just put in this place where there's just only so much they can do. And so my bad this week is just I'm amazingly feeling the direct impacts of Doge, and it's surprising and disappointing and unfortunate. My other this week, I'm gonna stay on this track of, deportations without due process are really scary to me. And the more I've thought about them, the more I am going to be paying attention to this space. Like elections have consequences. Things are going to happen that I agree and disagree with, but our Constitution is our contract with each other. It is the agreement by which we've said this is how we're going to live together as Americans and how we're going to resolve our differences. But man, you can't come into somebody's house, pick them up, put them in a van, and ship them off to a foreign country without due process. That is not in bounds for the agreement that we made via the Constitution. Because it scares the shit out of me, quite honestly, that if they can do it to somebody else who has the wrong tattoo or the wrong t-shirt or whatever and take them off to a foreign country. It actually, again, similar to my experience, like the government being slow is directly impacting me now. The deporting thing or the deportation thing for the first time ever feels like it actually could really apply to me. And that scares the crap out of me.
Yeah, I was just actually listening to a news story earlier today about where people that had made a wrong turn in Detroit and accidentally went across the bridge that takes them into Canada to make a U-turn. As they came back in, they're getting detained, and some of them are American citizens that they're children of immigrants, but they're still American citizens, and so they're being held in facilities that are not appropriate for children as American citizens, being detained without due process for simply making a wrong turn, and that's some pretty scary stuff. Like, it's already starting to kind of slide that direction pretty quickly. For my part, my goods, bads, and others are a little more mundane than that. But on my goods, I got a burr under my saddle about a week ago that I was really upset with the Naval Academy for canceling speakers, for pulling books out of the library. And I know this is a sticky position that the superintendent of the Naval Academy is in, as far as having to like obey, somebody that's in her chain of command. But at the end of the day, like, the institution needs to remain independent, and its mission is about developing its midshipmen mentally, morally, and physically. And I don't think you do that by banning books or by canceling speakers. And so I wrote an open letter, and I posted it on the internet, and I have been really heartened by the support that it's been getting. Military is fairly, traditionally conservative institution. You tend to a lot of folks that we served with vote Republican. I think something like 2/3 of the military voted for Trump, for example, or veterans, I should say. But I've been watching as this list of people that have been signing up for this thing includes not just people that I served with, but like all over the map. Many, many different years of graduates. People that aren't graduates but are just kind of part of the broader community, people that I haven't heard from in a long time. And it's not politically active, quiet, the professionals that I respected when I was in the service, just watching them kind of pop up. I won't divulge any of their names, but I'm just really excited about that. And it gives me, that there's people are fed up with that behavior, and I'm hoping that we continue to kind of stand for what is the right thing to do. The second good I'm going to add in there is that my mother-in-law has been dealing with a health issue, and we got some really good news about her health. We're not out of the woods by a long shot, but it was good, and that was a relief to me. It was a relief to my wife. I think the kids are generally oblivious to it. So
sure. Yeah, it's good news though. That's awesome.
Yeah, and then for my bad it's kind of personal. As I've been feeling just a little overwhelmed here recently. There's just a lot about being like a CEO of an early stage startup, about like you're just having to wear so many different hats. And, we talked about earlier about how I'm having to sign in for the second shift to make sure that I'm getting my kids to all their various activities, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I'm just feeling like I'm barely keeping all the balls in the air right now. Mm-hmm. So, haven't totally dropped one yet, but like I'm not juggling as well as I should be at this point. So,
yeah, I feel you.
So, yeah, I know you do. And then the other that I'm going to talk about is my wife came into our bedroom last night after putting my son to bed last night. She goes, "He stinks." And it's puberty apparently has arrived.
Oh.
So, it wasn't about bad grooming habits. It's just about like, a boy turning into a young man. And so... we all go through that. I know my mother did the exact same thing with me. I'm sure your mother did with you. But So, you know, as far as the phase of life stuff that we've been kind of talking about with Jim and before, I'm definitely, the moment has arrived that I am now in the new phase of life of having to deal with a teenager. And so I'm going to keep an eye on that because, like, I think there's some shifts coming.
Yeah, that's scary. My boy turns 11 this weekend, so I got a couple of years before that happens. But that's, generally speaking, my boys smell. They have general hygiene issues, but I think that's typical of all boys, less than, well, I guess now including teenagers. But yeah, that's a challenge I'm going to kick the can down the road on. I know it's going to be a challenge, but maybe I'll learn from you.
It's coming a lot sooner than you think. My son's 11 too. So,
oh my gosh, that's happening.
Yeah.
Whoa,
that's happening.
Okay.
That's happening. So,
oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm not ready for that. Not ready for it.
Yeah. All right, man. I think that's all we've got for this show. I think that's all we've got time for today, Neil. So for everybody at home, thanks for listening and for being a part of this conversation at Hardpoints around energy security in the startup world. If you found today's episode useful or thought-provoking, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling generous, make sure to share it on social media or send it to someone who would appreciate all the signal that we hopefully are providing through the noise. Thanks again to Jim Grossman for joining us. Hardpoints is produced by Jordan Garuso and brought to you by the Valor Media Network. We'll see you next week.